My son-in-law, Daniel, his face a gray, sweaty mask of sleepless terror, stood shaking in my doorway at 3 in the morning. "Stop it," he whispered, his voice a ragged, broken thing. "Please, just stop it. I can hear you. Even when I'm asleep, I can hear you. You're in my dreams, whispering my name." And I looked up from my book, met his wild, terrified eyes, and with the calmest, most honest voice I could muster, I said the words that finally broke him completely. "Daniel," I said softly, "I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't said a word." "Hi, everyone. I'm Grandma Beatrice. My name is Beatrice Cole. I am 82 years old, and I am from a small, quiet town in rural Pennsylvania. The silence in my house is a great comfort to me. It wasn't always that way. This is a story about a quiet war. A war fought not for money or property, but for the very space that sound occupies in a home. It is a secret I have held in the deepest, most silent part of my heart. A story so strange, I have never dared to share it. My own daughter, my sweet Katherine, believes her husband simply had a nervous breakdown from the stress of his work. She doesn't know the truth. She doesn't know that her brilliant, charismatic husband, a man who built his world with the power of his own voice, spent 2 years trying to silence me, to erase me with his noise, until I was nothing but a quiet ghost in my own home. He mocked my silence. He belittled my quiet nature. He thought my voice was so worthless, it didn't even deserve to be heard. So I decided to make my voice the only thing he could hear. I decided to get into his head, to get into his dreams, and to haunt him with the very thing he thought he had taken from me. This is not a story about a haunting with chains and spirits. This is the story of a haunting with a whisper. Before I begin, I must ask you for a moment of your quiet support. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. To know that you are out there, truly listening to my quiet voice, gives me the strength to tell this strange and terrible story. To understand the power of my silence, you must first understand the man who taught me to love it. My husband, Thomas. My life, my true life, was a 55-year-long, beautiful, and quiet conversation with him. I married Thomas Cole in 1960. He was a watchmaker. Not a seller of watches, but a true artisan. A man who spent his days bent over a small desk with a jeweler's loupe in his eye, working with tiny, intricate gears and springs. His world was one of meticulous precision, of a silence so profound you could hear the tiny, perfect tick of a balance wheel. He was a quiet man, a man of few words, but his presence was as solid and as steady as the grandfather clock he built for me that still stands in my hallway. He believed that the most important things were often the quietest. "Bea," he used to say, his voice a low, gentle murmur. "Anyone can make noise. The real art is in making something that works perfectly, in silence." Our life in this small, sturdy house was a reflection of his philosophy. It was a life of quiet companionship. We didn't need to fill the air with chatter. We could sit for hours in our living room, he at his work table, me in my armchair with a book, and the silence between us was not empty. It was full. It was full of love, of respect, of a deep and comfortable understanding. Our home was a sanctuary of peace. Our daughter, Katherine, was born in 1968. She was the one beautiful, loud noise in our quiet world. She was a whirlwind of energy, of emotion, of chatter. She was the opposite of her father in every way, and he adored her for it. She was a sweet, loving girl, but she was always searching. Searching for a bigger life, a louder life than the one we had in our quiet little town. She was a girl who was easily impressed by noise, by charisma, by the appearance of power. She mistook volume for substance. It was a flaw I found endearing. I never imagined it would one day lead her to choose a loud, hollow man over her own quiet mother. When my Thomas passed away from a stroke 7 years ago, the perfect, quiet rhythm of my world stopped. The silence in the house was no longer a comfort. It was a vast, deafening emptiness. I was 75 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, terrifyingly alone. Katherine was my rock. She was so good to me. She was in her late 30s, living in Philadelphia, but she would drive home every weekend. She would fill the house with her energy, her chatter, and it was a temporary balm on my grieving soul. It was during this time that her boyfriend, Daniel, became a permanent fixture in her life, and then in mine. I had met Daniel a few times, and I had been, like my daughter, completely dazzled. He was a motivational speaker and a life coach. His entire career was built on the power of his voice. He was handsome, charming, and radiated a confidence that was like a physical force. He could walk into a room and command it with a smile and a well-turned phrase. He was the loudest, most vibrant person I had ever met. After Thomas's death, he turned the full force of his charisma on me. He was a master of performative sympathy. He would listen to my stories about my quiet, gentle husband with an intense, focused gaze that made me feel like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. "He sounds like a man of incredible depth, Beatrice," he would say, his voice a rich, resonant baritone. "The world needs more men of quiet strength. It's a lost art." He knew exactly what to say. He was a professional talker, after all. He saw the chaos of my husband's financial affairs, the small, scattered accounts, the old-fashioned passbook savings, and he saw an opportunity to be my savior. "Beatrice," he said one day, his voice full of a deep, caring authority, "you can't be expected to handle all this. This is a world of confusing paperwork. Let me help you. Let me be your advocate. Let me take this burden off your shoulders." He spoke of consolidating my assets, of simplifying my life. He made it sound like an act of profound kindness. And my daughter, my Katherine, who was so in awe of his confidence, of his ability to navigate the loud, complicated world she so admired, was his greatest champion. "Mom, you have to let him," she pleaded. "He's a genius at this stuff. He just wants to help us, to protect you." I was lonely. I was grieving. I was intimidated. And I was so tired. So I agreed. I signed a durable power of attorney, giving him control over my financial and legal affairs. I thought I was handing my burdens over to a strong, capable man who would protect me. I didn't realize I was handing the keys to my quiet sanctuary over to a man who despised silence, who saw it as a vacuum that he was divinely entitled to fill with the sound of his own voice. The invasion began about 4 years ago. It began with a crisis he had, I now believe, engineered. He announced that he was leaving his motivational speaking company to start his own exclusive life coaching brand. He needed a quiet place to write his book and build his new empire, and he needed to cut his overhead. They sat me down, Katherine and him, their faces a perfect performance of loving concern. "Mom," Katherine said, "we have an idea that we think is perfect for everyone. What if we moved in with you? Just for a year or so, while Daniel launches his new brand. We could pay your bills, manage the house, and most importantly, we could be here with you. We worry about you being all alone." It was a perfect trap, baited with love and my own loneliness. I said yes, and the day they moved in, the quiet, peaceful sanctuary my husband had built for me died. My home was immediately filled with his noise. The television was on, constantly tuned to loud news channels. He was always on the phone, pacing through the house, his voice booming as he coached his clients or networked with his contacts. He would listen to loud, aggressive self-help audiobooks in the living room. The comfortable silence I had cherished was shattered, replaced by a constant, inescapable barrage of his voice, his opinions, his noise. At first, I thought it was just the exuberance of a passionate man, but I soon realized it was something more. It was a form of conquest. He saw my quiet nature, not as a personality trait, but as a weakness, a flaw, a silence to be corrected. He began to mock me for it, at first gently, then with a growing, condescending cruelty. He gave me a nickname. He called me the Quiet Mouse. "How's the quiet mouse today?" He would boom across the breakfast table. "Got any big, silent plans?" Katherine, my daughter, would laugh along with him. She saw it as a term of endearment, a playful acknowledgement of my personality. She didn't hear the contempt dripping from the words. She didn't see that he wasn't just teasing me. He was diminishing me, turning my character into a caricature, my dignity into a joke. I retreated further into myself. My silence became my shield, my armor. The less I spoke, the less ammunition I gave him. I would answer his questions with a simple nod or a shake of my head. I became an expert in the language of nonverbal communication. But even my silence was not safe from him. He began to narrate it, to interpret it for me, to fill it with his own meaning. "Oh, look," he would say to Katherine in front of me, as if I were a piece of furniture. "The quiet mouse is disagreeing with me. I can see it in her eyes. But she won't say anything, of course. She just sits there, silently judging." He was projecting his own insecurities onto my silence, and then punishing me for them. He was turning my quiet retreat into an act aggression. It was a masterful, cruel form of gaslighting. He was making me the villain in a story I wasn't even participating in. I felt like I was disappearing, being overwritten by the loud, obnoxious character he had created for me. The physical world of my home began to reflect my internal erasure. My things, the quiet symbols of my life with Thomas, were slowly replaced by his loud, ostentatious symbols of success. My simple, handmade quilts were replaced with garish, geometric patterned throws. My worn, comfortable armchair was moved to the basement to make room for a state-of-the-art massage chair that hummed and vibrated, adding another layer of mechanical noise to the house. He was a man who was terrified of silence. I realized that his constant noise, his booming voice, his endless stream of self-help jargon was not a sign of his strength, but of his profound emptiness. He was a hollow drum, and he needed to beat on everything around him to feel real. My quiet, self-contained world was a threat to him. It was a mirror that reflected his own hollowness back at him, and he could not stand it. So he had to shatter the mirror. My health began to suffer under the constant, low-grade stress. I wasn't sleeping. The endless noise in the house, the constant feeling of being watched and judged, was wearing me down. I developed a tremor in my hands. I lost my appetite. I felt a deep, profound weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. It was the weariness of a soul that is being slowly, methodically erased. When I would mention my symptoms to my daughter, she would filter them through Daniel's narrative. "Mom, maybe you're not sleeping because you're anxious," she would say, her voice full of a clinical concern she had learned from him. Daniel says that anxiety often manifests in physical symptoms in the elderly. They had an answer for everything, and the answer was always that the problem was me. The breaking point, the moment the quiet, retreating ghost inside me finally turned and faced her tormentor, was not a loud, dramatic event. It was a quiet, intimate, and deeply revealing one. It happened in the one place Daniel was not performing, the one place he was truly himself. His sleep. Because of my own insomnia, I was often awake in the dead of night. The house would finally be quiet, the only time I felt a flicker of peace. One night, around 3 a.m., I was in the kitchen, getting a glass of milk when I heard a sound from their bedroom upstairs. It was Daniel's voice. But it was not his usual booming, confident baritone. It was a low, frightened whimper. He was talking in his sleep. Driven by a curiosity I didn't understand, I crept to the bottom of the stairs and listened. He was having a nightmare. His words were mumbled, fragmented, but I could piece them together. He was dreaming about being on a stage, in front of a huge audience, but when he opened his mouth to speak, no sound came out. He was dreaming of being silenced. A strange, cold understanding began to dawn on me. This man who filled the world with his noise, his greatest, most secret terror, was silence. His own silence. I began to listen every night. It became my secret ritual. I would sit in the dark, silent kitchen and listen to the fears that haunted his sleep. And I began to learn his secrets. He would talk about his father, a man who had apparently been a harsh, critical figure who had always told him he would amount to nothing. He would whimper about his clients, terrified they would discover he was a fraud. He would mumble about money, about debts I never knew he had. In his sleep, the confident, charismatic life coach was gone. And in his place was a small, terrified little boy, afraid of being found out. He was the hollow drum, and in his dreams, I could hear the echoes of his emptiness. For weeks, I just listened. I was gathering intelligence. I was studying my enemy's deepest vulnerabilities. And as I listened to his fears, a new feeling began to take root in my heart, pushing aside the despair and the helplessness. It was a cold, quiet, and deeply powerful sense of purpose. He had used his voice to destroy my world. I would use my voice to destroy his. But I would not shout. I would not argue. I would do something far more insidious. I would take the very silence he had forced upon me, the silence he had mocked and belittled, and I would weaponize it. I was going to get inside his head. I was going to become the quiet, inescapable whisper in the back of his mind. My plan was terrifying in its simplicity. It was a plan that required no lawyers, no documents, no confrontation. It required only my voice, his name, and the dead of night. The first time I did it, my heart was pounding so hard, I thought he would hear it from upstairs. I waited until I heard the familiar, restless murmurs of his nightmares begin. I crept to the bottom of the stairs. The air was cold and still. I took a deep breath, and I whispered. It was a sound that was barely a breath of air, so quiet it might have been imagined. I whispered his name. Daniel. Ooh. I said it just once. Then I retreated back to the kitchen and waited, my body trembling. Upstairs, the restless murmuring stopped. The house was completely silent. After a moment, I heard him cry out, a sharp, terrified sound. What? Who's there? I heard Katherine's sleepy voice. What is it, honey? You're dreaming. No, he said, his voice shaking. I heard something. I heard someone say my name. You're having a nightmare, Dan. Go back to sleep. He didn't go back to sleep. I heard him get up and pace the room. I heard him check the lock on the door. I had planted the first seed of fear, a sound he couldn't explain, a voice that came from nowhere. I waited 2 nights, and then I did it again. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and whispered his name into the silent house. Daniel.I. This time, his reaction was faster. A sharp cry. There it is again. Did you hear it? I didn't hear anything, Katherine said, her voice full of a sleepy annoyance. You're starting to scare me. You need to get more sleep. The next morning, he looked awful. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands were shaking as he poured his coffee. He looked at me, sitting silently at the kitchen table, with a new, strange expression. It was a mixture of his usual condescension and a new, flickering suspicion. Did you sleep well, Beatrice? He asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. Yes, Daniel, I said quietly, looking up from my tea. Like a baby. My quiet, meek silence was no longer just a sign of my weakness. It was now a source of his terror. He didn't know where the voice was coming from, but he was beginning to suspect the quiet old woman who sat in the corner, watching him, was somehow connected to it. He was at war with a ghost, and he had no idea how to fight back. The haunting had begun. After those first 2 nights, I knew my weapon was effective. His mind, so full of its own noise, was exquisitely vulnerable to a single, inexplicable whisper. He was a man made of bravado and bluster. I was going to dismantle him, piece by piece, with a sound he couldn't fight, a sound he couldn't even prove was real. I became a student of psychological warfare. My days were quiet, observant. I was the quiet mouse, shuffling through the house, docile and invisible. But my nights were my battlefield. I became a creature of the dark, a ghost who traded in whispers. I didn't do it every night. That would have been too predictable. I let him have a night or 2 of peace, of restless, dream-filled sleep. I would let him start to believe it was just his imagination, that he was just stressed. I would let him regain a fragile foothold on his own sanity. And then, when he was least expecting it, I would strike. I began to vary the attack. I would no longer just whisper his name from the bottom of the stairs. I knew the secrets of the house. I knew about the old, unused laundry chute that ran from the upstairs hallway down to the basement, its grate hidden behind a tapestry. Its opening upstairs was just a few feet from their bedroom door. It was a perfect, secret conduit for a whisper. I would go down to the dark, musty basement, a place they never went, and I would speak up into the chute. The sound would arrive in the upstairs hall as a disembodied, directionless whisper, seeming to come from the very walls of the house. Daniel. The effect was devastating. I would hear him leap out of bed, his heart pounding. I'd hear him open his bedroom door and listen, frantic, in the silent hallway. He was hunting for a sound that was no longer there. He was hunting for a ghost. His desperation grew. He started sleeping with a light on. He bought a white noise machine, a device that was supposed to create a calming, constant hum. It was the ultimate irony. The man who had filled my house with his noise was now trying to build a wall of sound to protect himself from a whisper. It didn't work. My voice was a needle, and it could pierce his wall of static with ease. I would just wait until the dead of night, and I would find a way to deliver my message. Katherine, my daughter, was caught in the crossfire. At first, she was annoyed with him. "Daniel, you need to see a doctor," I heard her say. "You're stressed. You're not sleeping. It's affecting your work." But as the weeks went on, and his terror grew, her annoyance turned to her own brand of fear. She was living with a man who was unraveling. The strong, confident, charismatic man she had married was turning into a terrified, paranoid insomniac. His power, the very thing she had been so attracted to, was draining away, night by silent night. I had decided it was time to escalate my campaign. It was no longer enough to just say his name. I needed to get deeper into his head. I began to use the secrets I had learned from his own nightmares. I had heard him whimper in his sleep about his father, about his fear of failure. So, one night, I stood at the bottom of the stairs, and I didn't whisper his name. I whispered a phrase in a voice that was not my own, a low, gravelly imitation of an old man's voice. "You'll never be good enough." The cry he let out that night was different. It wasn't just fear. It was a sound of pure, soul-deep pain. I had taken a secret fear from the depths of his subconscious, and I had given it a voice in the waking world. The next day, he was a wreck. He was drinking heavily. He and Katherine had a terrible, screaming fight. He accused her of not believing him. She accused him of losing his mind. The foundation of their partnership, his unshakable confidence, was crumbling. And I, the quiet mouse, just sat in my armchair, reading my book, a silent witness to the destruction I was orchestrating. The final phase of my haunting was the most daring. It was the one that would break him completely. I was going to enter his dreams. He had started taking sleeping pills, a desperate attempt to find a dreamless, silent oblivion. But the pills just made his sleep heavier, his defenses weaker. He would still talk in his sleep, his nightmares now more vivid, more terrifying. He was still dreaming of being on that stage, his voice gone. I knew what I had to do. It was a terrible risk. If I was caught, the game would be over. They would know I was not a senile old woman, but a monster. But I was past caring. I was a ghost now, and ghosts are not afraid of consequences. I waited for a night when I knew he was deeply sedated. I heard the slow, heavy breathing of his drugged sleep. And I did the unthinkable. I crept up the stairs. The floorboards did not make a sound under my light, careful feet. I walked to their open bedroom door. The white noise machine was humming. A nightlight cast a pale, sickly glow over the room. Katherine was sleeping, facing the wall. Daniel was on his back, his mouth slightly open, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. I stood in the doorway, my heart a cold, steady beat. I did not enter the room. I just stood there, on the threshold, and I began to speak. My voice was a bare thread of sound, a sub-audible whisper, designed to slide under the hum of the white noise machine and directly into his sleeping mind. I did not whisper his name. I did not whisper his fears. I whispered the narrative of his dream. "You're on the stage, Daniel," I whispered. "The lights are so bright. Thousands of people are watching you, waiting. You open your mouth to speak, but there is no sound. Only silence. They're starting to laugh, Daniel. They all know you're a fraud, Daniel. They all know you're a fraud. He began to thrash in the bed, whimpering, caught in the nightmare I was narrating for him. You have nothing to say, I continued, my voice a relentless, silken thread of poison. You are empty, Daniel. A hollow drum. And now, everyone can see it. Edaka. He cried out, a loud, strangled sob, and sat bolt upright in bed, his eyes wide with a terror that was not from a dream, but from a waking nightmare. He was looking right at the doorway, right at me. I did not move. I did not run. I just stood there, a pale figure in the dim light of the hallway. And I let him see me. The scream that ripped from his throat was the sound of a man's soul tearing in half. Katherine woke with a start, her own cry of alarm joining his. They both stared at me, the quiet old woman in the doorway, the ghost who had been whispering in their dreams. I did not offer an explanation. I did not show fear. I simply met my son-in-law's terrified gaze, held it for a long, silent moment, and then I turned and walked back to my room, closing the door softly behind me. I had delivered my final message. The war was over. The house erupted in chaos. The screaming, the accusations, the hysterical sobbing, it went on for hours. He was trying to explain the unexplainable, that I had been inside his head, that I had spoken the words of his dream. She was trying to rationalize, to find a logical explanation for what was clearly a complete psychotic break. She was just standing there, he shrieked. She was talking about the dream. How could she know about the dream? She wasn't talking, Daniel. Katherine cried back. She didn't say anything. You were having a nightmare and you saw her in the hall. You're sick. You need help. That was the beautiful, perfect, untraceable nature of my revenge. He knew, with an absolute, soul-deep certainty, what I had done. But he could never prove it. To everyone else in the world, including his wife, he was simply a man who had collapsed under pressure, a motivational speaker who had lost his own mind. He was a fraud, just as his nightmare had told him. I had not just haunted him, I had made his worst fear come true. They left the next day. It was not a planned, orderly departure. It was a flight. Katherine, a woman who valued appearances above all else, could not abide the public shame of a mentally unstable husband. She packed their bags, her face a mask of grim, terrified resolve. She was not leaving a mother-in-law. She was escaping a haunted house. Daniel was a shell. He was sedated, his eyes vacant and full of a terror that I knew would be his companion for the rest of his life. He looked at me one last time as they were leaving, and there was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, bottomless fear. He was afraid of me. He was afraid of my silence. My daughter, my Katherine, did not speak to me. She could not look at me. I don't know what she believes. If she believes her husband simply went mad, or if, in the deepest part of her heart, she suspects the truth of what the quiet mouse was capable of. It doesn't matter. She made her choice when she allied herself with his noise against my silence. She chose the hollow drum. And now, she has to live with its empty echo. They moved to another state. I hear, through my other children, that Daniel is in a long-term care facility. Quiet place. He is being treated for a severe anxiety disorder and psychosis. He rarely speaks. The man who is so terrified of silence is now trapped in it. The house is quiet again. It is the deep, peaceful, and restorative silence that I remember from my life with Thomas. The grandfather clock is back in the hallway, its steady, gentle tick-tock the only sound. It is the sound of my life, the sound of my victory. I did a terrible thing. I know that. I took a man's mind, and I broke it. I used his deepest fears against him, and I drove him into a darkness from which he may never emerge. I do not ask for forgiveness, and I do not feel guilt. I feel a profound, quiet, and terrible peace. I feel like the survivor of a long war, who has finally come home. I learned that silence is not a weakness. It is a power. In a world that is so full of noise, of shouting, of people desperate to be heard, the person who can be comfortable in the quiet, the person who can listen, holds all the cards. I learned that the most effective way to fight a loud, arrogant person is not to shout back. It is to be quiet, to watch, to listen, and to find the one secret, quiet thing that terrifies them, the one thing their own noise is designed to drown out. And I learned that a voice does not need to be loud to be heard. A whisper, at the right time, in the right ear, can be more powerful than a scream. It can be a prayer, or it can be a curse. So, if you are out there, and the world is trying to drown you out with its noise, do not try to shout over it. Be quiet, listen, and find your own whisper. It is the most powerful voice you have. Thank you for lending me your quiet attention and for listening to my story. It has been a strange comfort to finally give it a voice. If my story has resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you would like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell. In the comments below, I invite you to share a story about a time when silence, not noise, brought you strength or clarity. Love you all. This is Grandma Beatrice, and I'll see you in the next story.